that for everyone internationally that's watching us at the moment. What a wonderful scene. What are we going to do, everyone? Fantastic. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Renee Herdenkamp, who's going to open tonight's event.
Good evening, everybody. Can't see you very well, but I know that you're there. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Renee Herdenkamp. I am an NHS GP, a practicing NHS GP. I am a presenter for Talk TV. I'm a mum of a 34-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I'm partnered to the very long-suffering Colin, who's down here in the front, who, without him, I wouldn't be able to do all of those things that I've just spoken to you about. So thank you, Colin. I'm one of the co-founders of Together and an exec board member, and I'm really excited about this event tonight. To welcome you here for our second anniversary that, as Alan said, we didn't want to have, but now we're having it and it seems like an ongoing thing. We're quite passionate about it. So what a year we've had. The last time I was standing here on our first anniversary talking to you, we were actually in the death throes, kind of COVID. So words like, I don't know, masks, PCR tests, you know, bubbles, tears, you know, those kind of words that had become common parlance were no more. They were kind of dying. But I say that because whilst now this evening we want to talk about how we go forward, what the tasks are, we have to keep an eye on the past as well and learn from it, because it's not completely gone away. There are plenty of people that would see us plunge back into those restrictions and those, you know, taking away our freedoms in a cough. I work with those people on a daily basis, so don't be complacent. We must make sure that never again are they able to take away our freedoms in the way that they did. So, when Together got together, we were really focused on getting those freedoms back. That's why we came together. And the main campaign that we had when I came here last year was to overturn the vaccine mandate that had been arbitrarily imposed on our care workers, not on our doctors, not on our nurses, our physiotherapists, our shop workers, on our care workers. And we worked so hard. We gathered petitions together, which, you know, people here in the audience delivered to Downing Street. We lobbied members of Parliament. We held rallies, and it worked. Eventually, the government, against all of that pressure, overturned that mandate, but not before we had lost tens of thousands of care workers who just didn't want someone else telling them what they had to put in their body. And we see the ramifications of losing those people every day now in the NHS. You know, those people haven't come back. Why would they come back to one of the most important jobs that exists, that is totally undervalued and underpaid? Why would they? And we see that in the NHS now, there are 13,000 people as we sit here today who are fit to be discharged from hospital, but can't be because there are not enough care workers in the community to just help them back to life. So when the back door of the NHS is clogged, the front door cannot open anymore. So the ramifications from COVID are still here, they're still with us. So there are lots of battles still to be won. This win that we've had was important, and it really was just the start of what Together stands for and what we need to do going forward. But what it proves to us is that if we work together, and hence the name, we can actually achieve things when most people would have said, you'll never do that, nobody listens. I hear it all the time. You know, oh, don't sign that petition because nobody's listening. They are. With every email, with every petition, with every rally, people are listening. We saw earlier when Alan spoke about Mark Harper saying to him, please stop your people emailing me. We get the message. It's important, and we can work together to overcome anything, however hard it seems. But as we watched COVID unfold, most of us in this room could have predicted what it was a blueprint for, what was going to happen in the future. And we saw this major attack on our freedoms, on our physical freedoms, our speech freedoms, and even our thought freedoms. Who can forget the anti-abortionist, and I'm no anti-abortionist, I can tell you, but who was arrested for praying silently outside a clinic because of her thoughts. So we have to fight back about this. We are free people, and we need to reclaim that. So we're now seeing the same kind of restrictions morphing into climate. We knew it, didn't we? We knew that was going to happen with LTNs, ULEZ, restricted parking, extra parking if you dare to drive a diesel car. The list is endless, and we are making inroads there. Together did not play a small part, along with people like Howard Cox in Uxbridge, in winning that by-election. Again, working together makes things happen. The sexualisation of our kids and the removal of parental control from what they learn at school. How dare they tell us parents that we're not allowed to see what they might teach our children about sex? Disempowering people and disempowering parents is how they win. So don't be disempowered. If you're not getting the answer you want from your school, take your child out. That's what I will do, I guarantee it. Trans ideology that has actually infiltrated every single government department and every single corporation, from Costa Coffee to the education department. All of these things are designed to divide us, to break down society, to separate our children from us, and we, as a group, together, must fight back and stop that happening. So tonight is a perfect chance for us to gather amongst friends, and everybody in this room is a friend, to actually think about what just happened and go forward and make plans for how we want it to happen in the future and what we will allow. There are fires burning everywhere. And I almost feel that's deliberate. It's exhausting. I'm exhausted by it. I exhaust the people around me by it as I constantly listen to podcasts, read things, moan about things, join things. But it's too important to just let those fires burn. We have to, together, work to put them out. And we can put them out. So I'm really excited now to get things going tonight. It's going to be a brilliant evening. We're going to hear from fabulous speakers, and they're going to be in the hands of my friend, my colleague at Talk TV, the absolutely amazing freedom fighter, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's worth noting that the speakers tonight will be covering so many of the issues that we at Together have been campaigning for the last 2 years and will go into the future campaigning for. We've got, issues on freedom, liberties, privacy. These are fundamental rights that we have and must keep and take back. You'll know the faces that are going to be on our panel. They're all amazing. Jay Bhattacharya, the wonderful Laura Dodsworth, Carl Hennigan, Sherelle Jacobs, and Matt Goodwin. This is a really important night. It's the start of another huge year ahead, and I think arguably with an election looming, probably one of the most important that we will face, and we can make change. We can have an impact, we can make a difference. Even when it seems impossible and the mountain too high, we can do it together, and that's the importance, because when people come together, we always have an expert in an area that you want to talk about, that we can lean on, that we can gather resources from. We've seen it with Ben Pyle and his report that overturned Sadiq's lie about 4,000 people. That's the joy and the beauty of Together. So what I want you to do tonight is really enjoy the evening, think about what's being said. If you're already a member of Together, thank you so much. If you're not a member of Together, but you've come because you're interested in what we do, then please, I implore you to join, because it's with you, the members, that allows us to campaign and that allows us to do more and more. As Alan has already spoke about this afternoon, there is so much we want to do, but to do that, we need you to join together and support us. So with no further ado, I will introduce another person who has become a great friend, a great fighter for the cause, a very talented man who holds it all together, co-founder of Together, Alan Miller.
That was brilliant. Well done. Wow. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Renee, for a brilliant introduction. I've not got much more to say after that. And that's the thing about working with such brilliant people, enthusiastic, passionate and committed. And it's one of the real joys that has come about in the very difficult times that we've been facing. And it's much more of that to come, we hope, with us, we the people, our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues, the people that we disagree with as well, and the ability to engage with them and to win hearts and minds. So welcome to everyone to the 2-year anniversary. Hello everyone who's watching at home in UK and internationally. But what a year this has been. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But just first of all, we've got a message from a very dear friend who's helped us a lot, who can't be here tonight. For those of us as old as me, you'll remember This Is Your Life. It's a bit like that. It is, of course, the wonderful Beverly Turner. If we could have that video just quickly, please.
Evening all, Bev Turner here from GB News. I'm so sorry that I can't be with you tonight in a room of so many of my favourite people doing such remarkable work, defending what it is to be a free British human in 2023, a place where you are innocent until proven guilty, a place where you should be able to speak freely in the media without having your voice silenced. So many democratic fundamental principles are at stake, and I thank each and every one of you for what you're doing to bravely push back against so many pernicious changes to our lives. I'm thinking ULEZ, LTNs, the suppression of free speech. All of that threatens the very existence that we've come to take for granted. So happy birthday to you all. Big kiss to Alan Miller, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you. So what a night we've got with you with the speakers planned, hosted by Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very exciting. I've got to be on my best behaviour so I don't get told off. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our achievements Together and also about the year ahead. So when we hear from the speakers this evening, 2 of which have written some fantastic books that if you have not got them, you should. You can get signed copies, but Laura Dodsworth and Matthew Goodwin, brilliant books, very important. But we're going to be hearing about censorship, the new elite, about public health, democracy, nudge and freeing your minds, and about doing it together. So we're extremely thankful to the speakers and to Julia. But we have to remind ourselves that we live in an age where bureaucratic technocrats want to dominate through limits, restrictions, fear, surveillance, fining, lies, and spin, and avoiding democratic accountability wherever possible. This did not begin with a response to COVID, but it certainly was put on steroids then with lockdowns and impositions and suffocating our fundamental democratic principles. And Together, we all demonstrated what could be done by campaigning, and you've heard it already, by standing up together across the country. And more recently, we have all witnessed in our cities and towns a whole host of impositions during lockdowns brought in under emergency traffic orders, low traffic neighbourhoods, 15-minute cities, with lots of variations like active travel and livable streets, which really mean roadblocks, surveillance, restricting freedom of movement and independence, harming local businesses and families, and disregarding the majority who, when they are consulted, have said that they don't want any of these measures. Now, our campaigning in and with locals in Bristol, Bath, Edinburgh, Birmingham, Canterbury, Cambridge, Merseyside, and all across London and the surrounding counties has made a huge impact locally and nationally. This is the power of us together. We have put the issues on the map collectively and made it a part of a national and international discussion and part of the agenda. I just want you to take a little look at the reel of some of the little key points of the year that's just gone. So if we could play the Together reel, please, guys.
Has effectively been defunded by PayPal.
What a central bank digital currency is. so-called the digital pound.
The plan to extend the city's ultra-low emission zone was today ruled lawful.
The regulator Ofcom will even have powers to look inside the software.
Press that relationship in terms of debt.
Let's get better incomes for people. And we have never agreed to give up our rights for mobility and our rights for freedom. We're not going back to the feudal times. Sadiq Khan might think this is a done deal. It's absolutely not.
The government does not support the rollout of ULEZ to the whole of Greater London.
Together at the Together Declaration, we say take back democracy. What are we going to do, everyone? We're going to take back democracy.
What we're talking about is a highly centralised banking system. In fact, it will probably get rid of our commercial banks.
To reserve the right to hold currency and make peer-to-peer payments directly without third-party involvement or approval.
In terms of the mandate that was brought in, would there be a sense that we could bring those people back into the workforce to reinstate and compensate them? Because actually that could help a lot, release a lot of beds in the NHS.
Would I have done it any differently, looking back now? No, absolutely not.
Here outside 10 Downing Street, about to go in and deliver the Perseus report that's bringing all sorts of questions up about the MHRA and the regulatory body. In the end, it's going to be up to us, the public, to stop it.
I'm an optimist. I think to be an activist, you have to be an optimist.
Far more people died from the impact of isolation and neglect.
The more of us that stand up together, the more of us that can change it. And these weak authoritarians, look how quickly they start crumbling. And we have principles because what we're interested in is us, our family, our friends, our neighbours, our networks. We're not scummy, we're not gammons, we're not stupid. We're the people that make up Scotland and Britain. We've got to unite, we can transform it, and we can create the kind of society we want to do together. And if those people can't do it, let's move them out of the way and we'll run it. Let's all do it together. Well done everyone. Well done all of you, well done all of us. We got the Prime Minister to respond, ordering an inquiry. Now, we know about some of these inquiries, right? We're not silly. But ordering an inquiry into LTNs and Mark Harper, the Department of Transport, to stop funding LTNs. Well done to all of you, well done to all of us. Together, we also spent the past year campaigning, as we've just seen, around cash, digital ID, central bank digital currency and surveillance. And we've had some impacts. Now, it's not to say it's all sorted and it's all resolved, but 65,000 respondents to the Treasury, over 50,000 to the Bank of England, a recognition that we have to keep ATMs, that cash has to be continued. These are significant impacts that we've had in a short period of time. And as we grow, we can steer the direction of traffic much more in the way we want to see it. But we've got to do it and we've got to grow with more people. The government had to take notice because we organise, we have a 360 approach, we have calls to action, we do protests and lobbying, we get the media attention, and we make sure that we make as much noise as possible. But the more people we get involved, the better, and that's going to be a big thing for tonight. Now, on free speech, the challenge to deplatforming and debanking, we did a lot of work around that. We worked with people like the Free Speech Union and Us for Them, who we'd seen had been deplatformed already with PayPal and other platforms. And we were lobbying Andrew Griffith, the Treasury, the Financial Conduct Authority, to ensure that legal free speech had to be protected in Britain. And that was a precursor also to the things that happened around Nigel Farage's debanking and the response immediately in the reaction to that. We can get things done when we work together. Similarly, you saw the Perseus report. It was delivered to Downing Street. Very important, with Hart and other friends and campaigners, experts in logistics and standards, who worked in the Ministry of Defence and other areas, who said the scrutiny around standards and excellence and best practice have to be observed in this arena. And have they? And they have not been. And very significant that we continue on all of these fronts. And of course, ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone, people have already said about Ben Pyle. Many journalists couldn't believe that no one asked the question, Were 4,000 people really dying every year from the situation in London? But Ben Parle went and did the work. He followed the research, he dug down, he did due diligence, and as a consequence of that, and that our report together, that got a lot of attention. The Telegraph went out with it in the end, and many others covered it. We now know it was more like 13 minutes of life. But we also have discovered more things because of that, because the Telegraph then went and did more freedom of information requests, and we found out all about the attempts to interfere with Queen Mary's University and Imperial College. These are really important things. They enable us to shed light on the situation, to show about lies and about misinformation. They want to keep telling us about misinformation, about interfering with scientific research, not the science, but trying to change the outcomes of a report, as the deputy mayor's office staff tried to do. Now, I just want to say, yeah, hopefully that's not for them doing that, but for us challenging it. Absolutely right. I'm just going to show a little video as well of one of the really important campaigns that we've done. This is in Oxford, and Clint Pugh is one of many people that we've worked with in a grassroots arena. And we've made this a local, national and international issue around Oxford. The bus gates, the 15-minute cities, the fact that so many working people are going to be charged even more to drive in and park, nurses, first responders, key workers, and the utter contempt for the public and the disregard. And as that has been a very important battle across the country, similar battles are happening. And they're people that are really articulate and smart that we've worked with in a lot of different areas that are saying, this is how we can organise, this is what we can do about all these things. So if we just quickly see this video from Clint Pugh.
Hello, Alan and everybody else. I'd just like to say, Alan, thank you very much for all the work and effort with you and your crew, team put together to try and help us deal with the injustices that we seem to be facing on a basis all over the country. Here in Oxford, we're battling against the county council with their ill-thought traffic plans, which are causing huge amounts of congestion, huge amounts of pollution, huge amount of stress, for causing business to fail, and it's actually a complete injustice. But anyway, we thank you so much for your support. Without us all coming together, we're not going to have an effect. But we seem to be having an effect right now, and it seems to be, the tide seems to be turning. So carry on with the good work. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. All the best. Cheers.
We're seeing really important work. Places like Cambridge, where Cheyenne and the team there have actually won now, and the congestion charge is being dropped because of the campaigning work that people are doing in Cambridge. We've seen brilliant work. We've seen from Newcastle to Tower Hamlets, from Warrington, all for different reasons, LTNs being taken out and scrapped. We've seen challenges to the Clean Air Zone, 50,000 people or more not paying in the Midlands, and their appeals being upheld. We're seeing a whole discussion happening around net zero that underpins all of this, and we've just voted at the AGM to say that this is going to be a major campaign. If everyone can go to no-to-netzero.uk, we'd love you all to sign that petition tonight, and we can talk a bit more about it and to share it. We've launched a cabinet. In the last year at our AGM, we said we wanted to launch a cabinet, and we've launched a cabinet covering a range of areas such as health, social care, housing, energy and the environment, traffic, the economy, the public sector, democracy, and much more. And we're going to keep making sure that we get our voices heard at every level. Lobbying, in the media, grassroots, on the streets, with our workplaces, with our family and friends. And we're going to retrain our muscles as the public to exert pressure. We've had a couple of decades where the blue and red, similar technocrats just think that we should have things done to us. And so many people are politically homeless now. And we're going to make sure as the public that we get put at the heart of decisions for long-term planning and to have fundamental freedoms, rights, liberties and privacies intact. And just a word to say when some wonder if anything can be done, and Renee touched on this, and it's all inevitable, it's all just part of a plan, that we think is part of a sense that the elite have. You're not much cop, you're never going to do anything, you're all a bit stupid. We make the world. We are the innovators, we're the people that make this brilliant country work. We're not all these terrible things that they say, we're actually the decent backbone of Britain. And it's time we made our voices heard and had our ideas heard and put ourselves right at the heart and back of things together, which is what we're going to do. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to need to win hearts and minds. We need to convince people, not call them names, but address the issues with them. We need to get them involved. We need to work with groups and individuals. Often around the country, we're working with people, some are in the Labour Party, some have left, some are in the Conservatives, some have left, many independents, some people hate politics, all different ages, demographics. That's the beauty of the opportunity now. We've got a whole new situation where there's fertile soil, and these weak authoritarians that only know nudge and limits and restrictions, these weak authoritarians, they have no backbone. We've seen it now. We've seen it in Uxbridge. We've seen it in different places with a mandate. When we all start pushing back, if we coordinate ourselves, if we win hearts and minds, when we push back, we can have an impact and we can change things. And it's really important that we do. We can end up, in this general election year that we're moving forward with, we can end up setting the agenda. We already have them having a conversation about net zero and some brilliant work. People like Alison Pearson and others are writing about it, and we're going to hear from Sherelle tonight. But at the end of the day, very recently, that was just a given. No one even discussed what are the consequences of this? What's the cost benefit? What does it mean in terms of our energy independence, in terms of power cuts, in terms of incomes and jobs? And what does it mean in terms of our freedoms? And these are really important conversations, and bit by bit, we're going to win over more hearts and minds and convince people, but we all need to do it together. That's why we need you all to join as a member of Together. That's how we keep going, and to invite your friends, people watching at home, everyone join us, please. This is the way. When people say, where do you get your money from? Who backs you? We're very proud to say we do. It's like an insurance scheme. The people that have been involved in campaigning for freedom, we back ourselves. Well done, everyone, for backing us. And just before I finish up and hand over, I also want to give a shout out to a very dear friend who was a freedom fighter who's not with us anymore. But he's someone that was a producer and a music innovator for several decades. Many of us worked with him for a long time. He helped young generations. And when many people in the industry were scared to come out and publicly say things, he was on the demos. He's been on the freedom demos. He was on the demos around ULEZ and Haringey and LTNs. But a big shout going out to our friend Jason Kay. He's always with us. So finally, before we go to the speakers, we've seen in the last 48 hours a clambering by some MPs and journalists, of all people, journalists calling for an entire TV station, GB News, to be closed down. Now, it's clear that some will try to stifle and shut down any views they do not agree with. Together, our commitment to free speech, to engaging with those we disagree with civility, it's paramount. Without open debate and free expression, we have no freedom. It is one of our key pillars and principles at Together, and we shall continue to defend it and insist on it everywhere. That means continuing to challenge with the online safety bill that we have had an impact on, but it's very egregious. And it means continuing to challenge that you can't say that, shut this down, cancel situations, to say yes we can, and yes we must disagree and argue and thrash it out openly and civilly, because the alternative is too deadening and too dark. So what happens next in Britain is up to all of you, up to all of us in this room, and up to everyone watching. It's going to be up to us to determine what happens. We're the curators. We are the innovators. It's the most creative project that you can ever be involved in. How do we want Britain to be? What do we want it to look like? Just remember as well, when we changed the situation with the mandates in Britain, friends of ours in Canada and Australia and all that said, yeah, well, good luck, but you're not going to do that. But look how quickly things changed when that did happen. There are a number of battles that we need to fight, but we can do it and we can win it. And that's why we've got a cabinet to have in each area a clear assessment, to have reports, to have papers, and to win hearts and minds and to drive through the areas with expertise and to win the public over and put the public at the front of it. So the best celebration of the birthday that we can possibly have is to have an ongoing impact and that we keep the flame of freedom alive, shining brightly together. It's up to everyone here. It's up to us. So please make that commitment today and be part of the change. I shall be back, don't groan, at the very end for a few concluding words, and we're going to be very lucky to hear Rose Windross as well do a PA tonight. we've been formerly at Soul to Soul and many other places, which is great. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to be able to hand you over to Julia Hartley-Brewer and our great panel. Enjoy it. Thank you very much, everyone. Well done.
Thank you. Just spent the last 10 minutes texting my husband where the car keys were. Welcome to my life. Still allowed to drive our cars. Oh, so far anyway. I have to say, I first met Alan Miller actually via my show, radio station then. And he was this bloke who wanted to get pubs open. I thought, I can do business with this man. He's achieved an awful lot, and I am in awe of what Together has achieved over the last couple of years. There is, and I say this as someone who's a national broadcaster, who spends a lot of time with politicians, but there is a very loud, and there is a very influential, and there is a very powerful minority in this country who make decisions. I know a lot of them, went to uni with a lot of them, I'm friends with quite a lot of them, but they decide what we're allowed to do, and what we're allowed not to do, and what we're allowed to say, and what we're allowed not to say. And that's the bit that started worrying me. Because what Together has done, and what you all have done, is to mobilise not the silent majority. We've heard so much about them, haven't we, over the years? The silent majority. No, the silenced majority. The you can't say that people. The are you sure that's a good idea, people? They've given us a voice. They've given us a voice that's loud enough to be heard, and a voice that is loud enough to actually perhaps have an impact, and it really has. And what we've learned over the past few years is we have so much more power when we speak together and when we act together. But we can't speak together and we can't act together if we don't know there are other people who agree with us. And I am both sort of ashamed and proud of some of the things that happened in 2020 in terms of lockdowns. Sitting already with COVID in March 2020 in my home, broadcasting from home, not allowed to see anybody but my husband and daughter, and you know, trying to offer support to people who were also locked down, and then slowly realising, with the help of people who I had as guests on my show who were saying, we don't think this is a good idea. We think this isn't going to actually save anybody, and it's going to damage our children, our health, our mental health, our economy, our society. And they changed my mind, but only because I listened to them, and other people listened to them, and then people got in touch and were saying, we agree. And it was a journey. Now, some of us may have been on that journey from day one. Some of us be on that journey perhaps even in the last, I don't know, few months. Maybe you've just started looking at Sweden's data. Maybe you started on this journey way after lockdowns. Maybe it was all about ULEZ. It was about, you know, low traffic neighbourhoods. It doesn't really matter where we started on the journey, how far we've gone along the journey. It matters that we're on the journey. And it matters that we take everyone with us. And I agree with Alan. It's really important. We've got to stay civil. We've got to use facts, we've got to use words, we've got to use our togetherness to convince other people, because they do still want to silence us. And I agree. I don't work for GB News, but we don't want GB News cancelled. Because I don't want any voices cancelled. You know why? Because if I think someone is saying or doing something I don't agree with, I can argue with them. And you can only argue with them if you can hear what they've got to say. Now, there are a lot of people who want to silence us. They call us names, anti-vaxxer, climate denier, TERF, whatever it is. I mean, gosh, I don't know how we have time to kill polar bears. We're still killing grannies, aren't we? It's so difficult to keep up with all the duties we have. But they only have to resort to name-calling because they haven't got the facts on their side. They only have to resort to name-calling because they haven't got the arguments on their side. We do. We have got those. And it's really important that we fight every single day, crucially, and it's something Alan touched on the right to speak out, the freedom of speech, because we haven't got any other freedoms without the freedom to speak. And we know those freedoms to speak, to live our lives freely, they didn't take months to get, years to get, decades to get. They took centuries for people to get in this country. Okay? and they could be taken away from us with one swipe on WhatsApp by Matt Hancock. That's how dangerous it is. That is how tentative those rights are. You have to fight every single hour of every single day of every single year to keep those rights. If you don't speak out, they will stop you the next time you try. So just finally, I want to end, we won't always agree on everything. There'll be some of you who think, oh, well, you agree with the first few weeks of the first lockdown, or well, you don't agree on this, you don't agree on that. We don't have to all agree. We don't have to agree on anything or everything. We just have to know that when we all speak and when we work together, we are able to change things. And we can take back our democracy. Right, now, we have a lot of people to speak. We're already over time. Of course we are. So I'm just going to just very briefly introduce all of our speakers, and we'll get them up one by one to come and speak. We're going to hear first from Matt Goodwin, who's Professor of Politics in the School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent. He's also got a most brilliant Substack. It really, really is. I cannot talk it up more. Jay Bhattacharya is going to be sadly on video. I live to meet this guy. He's, of course, a Professor of Medicine, Economics and Health Research Policy at Stanford University. So what the hell does he know about anything? He's also, of course, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration. We've also got Laura Dodsworth, author of course, The State of Fear, and her brand new, again, equally brilliant book, Nudge Democracy. And Carl Hennigan, a Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford. Just an absolute bloody joy to have in the room. And the brilliant Sherelle Jacobs, a Telegraph columnist and just general all-round sensible person. What can I say? We've got lots and lots of questions I know people are going to want to ask. There's lots to talk about. I will get off the stage, we'll get to the side of the stage and introduce, without any further ado, the wonderful Matt Goodwin.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you to the co-founders and to Together for inviting me along. My name is Matt Goodwin. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Some of you I know from previous events, some of you I know from the Substack. For those of you who don't know, I've started a platform which has really been railing against what I think is a narrow, stifling orthodoxy that we can all feel in this country. About 60% of voters, and I poll them every week, will now say that they feel they can't really say what they think because they're scared of what might happen if they do so. About a quarter of university students in this country say they cannot share their real views in my lectures and seminars, and those of my colleagues, because they're scared of what might happen if they do so. So I started writing about this to try and, I guess, give voice to maybe people like yourselves who feel like the world has gone a little bit crazy. This week we've been producing new research on the pushback against net zero, showing why many voters actually rather like this growing pushback against net zero. And I've also walked people through the fight that we've been involved with in the universities, where the attack on free speech and free expression has been particularly strong. And over the last 18 months, a few of us have been pushing for the Higher Education Free Speech Act, which you may or may not know is now in place and defends academics who might pursue contrarian, unorthodox, non-conformist views, and who now cannot be discriminated against for sharing those views on campus. And the Higher Education Free Speech Act And the Higher Education Free Speech Act, even though it's made us a lot of enemies in higher education, and we were very loath to turn to the state for answers to that question, but universities were not reforming themselves. They couldn't be trusted to defend free speech and free expression. And that's become the first piece of legislation that we're aware of in the Western world, which is now proactively defending the likes of Kathleen Stock, the likes of Nigel Biggar, the likes of Jordan Peterson, the likes of Noah Carl, the likes of Joe Phoenix and others who do want to take on radical ideas, who do want to challenge some of the beliefs that are descending across our institutions. So if you're interested, you can get a discount on my Twitter just for the delegates here, and please do join us at mattgoodwin.org. What I wanted to talk about, though, was this new elite. And when I was asked to come and speak, I said, look, really, if you want to fight back, you have to really get at the epicenter of what's going on. What's at the epicenter is a new ruling class in this country. And this is not a conspiracy. It's simply the way in which the elite has changed over the last 50 years. And what we are living through is the rise of what I've called the new elite, a new elite graduate class that lives in the cities, university towns, comes from a very privileged background, filled with people who have the same social characteristics, that have the same ideology, who disproportionately dominate the institutions, not just the political institutions, also the media, creative industries, cultural institutions, and which increasingly look down on those who hold different political beliefs to their own. And the evidence for this is overwhelming, as we've seen today with GB News, but we've seen during COVID, we've seen in our debates over globalization, immigration, free speech, sex and gender. The new elite who dominate the institutions are the most likely to unfriend people on social media who they disagree with. They're the most likely to block people who they disagree with. They're the most likely to say they would feel unhappy if their son or daughter married somebody who held different political beliefs to their own. And they're most likely to display a type of class prejudice that they would not tolerate for a minute if it was directed towards any other group in society. And that's what we saw in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum, when millions of our fellow citizens were openly derided for being ignorant, bigots and gammons and so on. And over the last half century, essentially what's happened is that new elite have consolidated their position. They've taken over the epicenters of economic growth. They've taken over the big cities and the university towns. They've rewired the higher education system around their own group, so it only benefits their own group. Their social networks have become much more homogenous. Mike Savage at the University of Manchester has shown how the new elite are the most likely to marry other members of their group and are the least likely to socialize with people from different backgrounds. And you can see this in areas like the media, for example, where the media is now dominated by people who come from the same backgrounds, who have the same views, and who increasingly want to impose these political projects on everybody else. And we've seen that with the political and cultural and economic revolution that we're all living through today. And I talk a lot about what I call the revolution because that's exactly what it is. We have an elite consensus that serves 20% of the country and which ignores 80% of the country. That is what is happening. We have a political project that is geared around a commitment to hyper-globalization, to deregulating the economy, to hollowing out the British economy, to serving big business, to use mass migration in order to undermine the position of British workers, in order to keep the economy dependent upon cheap workers from abroad and consumption, a project which is hollowing out national democracy, which sent powers up to the European Union, and when that became no longer possible, continues to send powers out to unelected quangos, unelected technocrats, a politics in Westminster which has become indistinguishable, whether it's on the left or the right, and which has become very dismissive of people who hold different political viewpoints. And if you look, for example, at the latest Research, which was released last week, the British Social Attitude Survey, it shows that this consensus really only speaks to 1 in 5 voters, leaving many other people with a palpable sense that they're not even in the national conversation anymore. They're not even in the public square anymore. And even worse than that, when they do voice their views, when they do challenge this very narrow elite consensus, they're either silenced, as Julia said, or even worse, they're stigmatized as being socially unacceptable, as being somehow problematic, as being illegitimate, as being beyond the pale, outside of the realm of acceptable discourse. So what do we need to do about it? What I think we need to do about it is continue to build an alternative ecosystem. For the first time in history, we now have the ability to cultivate and support a generation of writers and activists who are completely independent from the legacy institutions, who are on YouTube and Substack and in organizations like Together. We don't need the legacy institutions to build that alternative ecosystem anymore. And we need to reform the institutions. We need to break up the legacy media. That's why it's critical that organizations like GB News and Talk TV and others are present in the media landscape. We need to break up the institutions. We need to reform the universities, because the kids who are coming into my lecture theatre this week, who were born in 2005, those students are not being exposed to the full range of ideas and beliefs that exist in wider society. They're certainly not being taught the importance of free speech and free expression. So we need to reform the institutions. We need to ensure that there's a wider range of voices within our national conversation. And as Alan said, that has to start at the grassroots, and it has to start with organizations like Together and similar organizations who are able to take on this elite consensus and mount an opposition to it from the grassroots. Because if polling voters has shown me anything over the last few years, sitting in focus groups every week with voters has shown me anything over the last few years, it's that much of the country feels exactly the same way as you do. Much of the country, firstly, is not even participating in politics because they've given up. That's what was so unique about Brexit. 2.5 million people came back into politics because, irrespective of what they thought about the EU, they could sense here was an opportunity to shake things up. You know, we need to keep pulling those people back into politics. Over 60% of people in this country say Labour and the Conservatives do not represent people like me. They don't speak for people like me. And the vast majority of people out there no longer trust the established institutions for good reason, because the last 20 years have been a catalogue of elite failure. Elite failure over COVID and the lockdowns, elite failure over migration and globalization, elite failure over foreign policy disasters, elite failure over the global financial crash, elite failure over the failure of elites to see inflation coming and the cost of living crisis coming, and yet still we're told to listen to the same people and to respect the authority of the same people. And the vast majority of voters out there are looking for something different. They're looking for a radical alternative that is willing to take on the elite consensus, not in a misogynistic, irresponsible, xenophobic way, but in a responsible, mature, competent, coherent, and credible way that connects with the aspirations and the wishes of the vast majority of voters out there. And I just think the only thing missing in this country right now is a vehicle that is actually willing and able to step into that space. And maybe you will be that vehicle. Who knows? Thank you.
know if I need this or not. I mean, you could hear me without a microphone. Who are we kidding? Let's get a video now, which we've got of Jay Bhattacharya, who's, as I say, at Stanford University, and who has sent us a video message. It's a live visit. What's a live video message? Who you'll be able to see right above me right now.
I'm so sorry I can't be there in person. Looking at the room from here, it just seems like an amazing event. I was actually able to come last year to the Together event, and I really wish I could have been there this year. But I have some words to say that maybe it'll be difficult to hear. The sad fact is that we are living in a time where our once liberal societies are no longer liberal. We live in a deeply illiberal society that punishes people for openly expressing heretical thoughts. And that statement that I just made, that we live in an illiberal society, requires some justification. I mean, nominally, we have democracies with constitutions, charters, whatever, committed to essential civil liberties necessary for a liberal society. And I admit, before the pandemic, I took these rights for granted. I took the right to free speech for granted, the right to worship, the right to protest, the right to free movement across borders. But during the pandemic, what I learned was that the government could violate each of every one of these rights, and in the name of infection control. During the pandemic, governments made it nearly impossible for independent scientists to discuss and disseminate ideas contrary to government public health policy. Government censored, smeared, and defamed dissident scientists who criticized government authorities in the name of science. And I say this from firsthand experience. What I want to do today is I want to tell you the mechanisms by which the government accomplished this amazing feat of silencing scientists. The way that they did this, I learned, the US government, I learned, violated my free speech rights and those of my scientist colleagues for questioning federal government COVID policies. The American government, working in concert with big tech companies, defamed and suppressed me and my colleagues for criticizing official pandemic policies, a criticism that's proved to be prescient. And while this may sound like a conspiracy theory, in fact, it's a documented fact. And it's one recently confirmed in a federal circuit court. So the main reason I was so looking forward to talking to you is to tell you about my experience with this court case, which has absolutely blown the lid off of the mechanisms by which the government suppressed speech. In August of 2022, the Missouri and Louisiana Attorney General's offices in the United States asked me to join as a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the Biden administration. The suit, it's still ongoing, aims to end the government's role in censorship and restore free speech rights. The lawyers in this case, this Missouri versus Biden case, took sworn depositions from many federal officials involved in the censorship effort, including Tony Fauci. I highly recommend, if you have time, to go look at the 8-hour deposition that he gave to the lawyers, where he could not recall basic scientific facts. In fact, he said, I don't recall 179 times in 8 hours. It's great, amusing listening if you have a few moments to hear somebody who set the narrative tell you that he doesn't recall the scientific basis on which he said it. The legal discovery also unearthed email exchanges between the government and social media companies. The content of these emails were absolutely shocking. It showed an administration willing to threaten and use regulatory power to harm social media companies that did not comply with censorship demands. The case revealed that a dozen federal agencies, and this includes the Surgeon General's office, the US CDC, the FBI, the State Department, they pressured Google, Facebook, Twitter to censor and suppress speech contradicting federal pandemic priorities. If you ever had any post on Google, on Twitter or on Facebook suppressed, it may very well have been as a result of the demands by the US federal government that speech that contradicted its policies be censored. In the name of suppressing misinformation, the government forced the social media companies to suppress true facts. This included facts relating to the evidence for immunity after COVID recovery, the inefficacy and damage of mask mandates, and the inability of the vaccine to stop disease transmission. True or false, if the speech interfered with government priorities, it had to go. And it didn't matter if you had credentials, it didn't matter if you had facts or papers on your side, your speech would be labeled as misinformation or would be taken off the platform altogether. And the threats were severe. Essentially, what the government told the social media companies is that if they didn't suppress speech, then the government would go after the social media companies using regulatory powers. The one judge writing about this evidentiary records analogized it to a mob attack. So someone like Al Capone going to a company and saying, well, that's a nice company you have there. Wouldn't it be terrible if something were to happen to it? And of course, social media companies complied. They like to have their companies run. And so they silenced a tremendous number of people, including scientists, to suppress speech. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the mechanism by which modern censorship actually works. It's not just by removing speech. I mean, the internet is such that you will be able to hear speech even if the government wants to censor it. The key mechanism is by essentially labeling scientists, labeling people, labeling ideas as outside the bounds, essentially excommunicating heretics by labeling ideas too dangerous to even think or speak, even if they're true. The government uses social media companies essentially to set the bounds for discussion. And if you disagree, you're a dissident, you're a heretic, you're going to be smeared as a misinformation artist. Okay, so that's the bad news, that we have governments around the world, especially the American government, working to suppress speech in this way. But on July 4th of this year, the U.S. Federal District Court Judge Terry Doughty issued a preliminary injunction in this case, ordering the government to immediately stop coercing social media companies. In the decision, Doughty called the administration's censorship infrastructure an Orwellian ministry of truth. He wrote this in a federal ruling. And on August, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed the Biden administration had indeed strong-armed social media companies into doing its bidding. The court found that the Biden administration, the CDC, the Surgeon General's office, the White House itself had engaged in a years-long pressure campaign on social media outlets designed to ensure that the censorship aligned with the government's preferred viewpoints. Now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, and I heard you all cheer the Great Barrington Declaration. I'm so grateful for every one of you that signed it. Thank you. I'll tell you, as a result of your signing it, you put yourself at some critical risk. What they wanted censored was ideas like the Great Barrington Declaration. The trouble began on October 4th, 2020, when my colleagues and I, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, a professor of medicine at Harvard, and Dr. Sunetra Gupta, an epidemiologist at the University of Oxford, Carl Hennigan's colleague, published the Great Barrington Declaration. We called for an end to economic lockdowns, to school shutdowns, and to other restrictive policies because, I don't need to tell you, they harm the poor, they harm children, they harm the economically disadvantaged, they harm the working class while conferring limited benefits. It called for focused protection, for strong measures to protect high-risk populations, especially the elderly. We spent trillions. Why not spend it protecting people at high risk? And then calling for low-risk people to return to normal life. Tens of thousands of doctors, public health scientists signed on. Julia mentioned Sweden. There's this country that apparently no one remembers in the northern part of Europe. And Sweden, which didn't have lockdowns, after early problems, embraced focused protection. They had among the lowest all-cause excess deaths, age-adjusted, than every other country in Europe, including the UK, including the United States, including Germany, including Finland, including Norway. And they suffered none of the learning loss for elementary school kids because they kept schools open for kids under 16 through the entire pandemic. In the United States, Florida, which followed a much more reasonable policy compared to much of the rest of the US, especially places like where I live in California, Florida has had lower all-cause excess deaths than California since the start of the pandemic. It turns out that civil liberties are good for your health. That in fact, though you were told that we needed to lock down, we needed to comply, we needed to deal with free speech orders, no, all of those were actually worse and bad for your health. Had we just simply followed a liberal society's commitments to free speech and other civil liberties, we would have had better health outcomes. And Florida, California comparison and the Swedish comparison makes that very clear. So the government, what they wanted to suppress was the fact that there were prominent scientists who opposed lockdowns and had alternate ideas, like the Great Barrington Declaration. They wanted to maintain an illusion of consensus in favor of lockdowns. It's impossible for me to speculate what might have happened if we had a more typical scientific spirit. Without censorship, we would have won the debate and the world would have moved along with a different and better path these last 3.5 years. Censorship is the death of science. It inevitably leads to the death of people. The US and the UK should have been a bulwark against it, but it wasn't during the pandemic. The tide is turning with cases like Missouri versus Biden, which is now sitting at the Supreme Court. But we have to reform our scientific institutions so that what happened during the pandemic never happens again. And in every formerly liberal countries, governments that suppressed speech, well, we have to work together to stop them, both at the judiciary and at the ballot box. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for having me.
Jay, I think they like you. I know you're going to stay around for. Isn't it amazing having so many of our heroes here? Isn't it just incredible? I know he's going to say we're going to have some questions. We are going to have to keep it a bit tight because everyone talks longer than they say they're going to. Funny that, including me. Up next, though, someone who I definitely want to hear from. Two just brilliant, well, more than 2 brilliant books, but 2 brilliant books I have particularly read. The wonderful, the fantastic Laura Dodsworth.
In a democracy, the government enacts the will of the people. You know it. These days, nudging is used by the government and its influencers to change the will of the people from the top down. While we think we live in a democracy, the truth is that power has been inverted. We live in a nudgeocracy. If democracy is about enacting the will of the people, one of the most fundamental questions we should have been asking ourselves is, what is our will and where does it come from? Our will is our decision-making capacity. It's a faculty of the mind, and it should be evident in our freedom of action, our behavior. Do you fully understand how your mind and your behavior are influenced? The nudgers, the psychocrats, the technocrats, they think they know what is best for you. And, even better, how to guide you towards it without you even being aware. The person who coined the term nudge, Cass Sunstein, said, "By knowing how people think, we can make it easier for them to choose what is best for them, their families and society." Isn't it great that there are people who know what's best for you? Psychology used to be about diagnosing and fixing people, but these days it's more about predicting and manipulating people. You might think there's nothing new to see here. Governments have always drawn on their understanding of human behavior to influence voting behavior or citizen behavior, but there is something new to see. Nudging is now embedded in governments. Since the first behavioural insights team was set up in the heart of UK government in 2010, there are now 300 behavioural insight units working with governments around the world, all trying to understand, predict and shape our behaviour. Now, the shaping part has really taken off. Policymakers are increasingly asking behavioural scientists to help with policy problems. The problem, you may not be aware, is often you. Human behaviour is seen as being the core of how to solve problems like climate change or pandemics or any of the perma-crises we're permanently stuck in. The nudges say it should be used for good. And it is hard to criticise efforts to tackle obesity, knife crime, organ donation, but there are more holes in these campaigns than you'd think. For instance, there are more organs available since it became the default, but that doesn't mean there are necessarily more organ transplants because the systems aren't in place. The nudges look to shift behaviour and they don't have an eye on the whole picture. Coming back to climate change, you can find in multiple government documents that if the UK is to meet its net zero climate goals, then we need to change how we travel, what we buy, what we eat, and how we use energy at home. It is our behaviour that they want to change. Now, Together has been battling ULEZ and LTNs with great success, so let's look at the travel part. We're given very laudable reasons why these policies must be foisted on the motorist or must regressively hit the poorest and the small businesses and the working classes. It's about air quality and road traffic accidents. But sometimes they say the quiet part out loud. In a House of Lords report called In Our Hands, Behaviour Change for Climate and Environmental Goals, one proposal reads, the measures that could dissuade private vehicle use include A, changing rules on the use of roads, such as reduced speed limits, school streets, low traffic neighbourhoods and other measures. B, road pricing, congestion charging, low emission zones, higher parking costs, workplace parking levies and other changes. This is all about dissuading private vehicle use. It's radical incrementalism. You achieve a radical end result with small steps, so small that you don't know how you got there. But if they told you at the outset what they wanted to do was make you give up your car, you'd say no. And another proposal in that same report says they want to reduce private car use by 1/5. It's all about making driving inconvenient and costly. Now, coming back to nudge more broadly, there are obvious ethical problems with governments using nudge. Nudge undermines your free will. Changing people's behaviour without their consent and knowledge is controversial. I can't believe it's seen as a pillar of modern government. If we continue to allow ourselves to be nudged for good, supposedly, then we've given up determining what good even is. It's been decided for us. We want a democracy and not a nudgeocracy. What do we do about it? Well, after I wrote A State of Fear, I tried to persuade the government that they should consult on their own use of behavioural science. To no avail. You won't be surprised. I asked the COVID Enquiry if they would look at the use of behavioural science and fear-mongering, but they didn't include it in their terms of reference. Where does that leave us? Well, we have to organise together, and we have to address our individual agency, because I'm sorry to tell you there's no government white knight. If you think of society as being an aeroplane in free fall, you need to put on your oxygen mask first, which is to say you need to free your own mind. Nobody is going to do it for you. I've written a book about this with a psychologist called Patrick Fagan. He's ex-Cambridge Analytica, and when you know that even he breaks cover to help write a book like this, times are bad indeed. The book's called Free Your Mind, The New World of Manipulation and How to Resist It. First of all, you need to accept your brain is disputed territory, and governments, businesses, social media platforms, and many more, they all want a piece of it. You can get immunity by learning the nudges and the propaganda tactics. Radical incrementalism is one of many, many techniques they are using on you all the time. You can protect yourself psychologically by adopting strong principles. Stand your ground. Trust your gut. Turn off your screens. Be the first to speak up. Stop haunting yourself with fears. And stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. Just to finish, we'll do another one of those in a minute. There is hope. Just as our psychology, with all of its built-in shortcuts, means that we can be influenced with appeals to conformity, authority, scarcity, shame, ego, fear, and many others, our marvellous minds also hold the key. We are ingenious. We organise. We gravitate towards truth. We're founts of creativity and strength, individually and together. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much indeed. Right now, let's hear from Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford.
Been so good so far, I feel like leaving, actually. One of the consequences of living in Oxford these days, and the LTNs, is that I find myself having to leave an hour earlier to get here these days, because it is difficult to get through the town. Now, I'm going to take you back. I want you to go back a bit in time to April 2020. Now, one of the things I also do is I'm an urgent care general practitioner. Actually, I'm one of those people who sees people face to face these days. It's a rarity. And I'll be working tomorrow morning. I remember in April 2020, sat outside a care home, and on the door was, "This care home is full of COVID." I'm thinking to myself, now I'm a pretty cool guy, but I actually had bought into the fear. I'm thinking, why didn't I just take the day off? But what I did is, when I went over the threshold, and I saw in that care home there were people working for £10 an hour, I looked in the eyes of these people and I thought, this is where the real COVID problem is. That was complete opposite to what we saw on news agencies like the BBC that were showing you these IC units. What we had was this process where young, healthy people were staying at home, yet in the midst of where the problems were, we had a lack of staff, we had people confined to their rooms and literally dying for a drink. Now, the key is, that was the moment for me where I started to question the status quo seriously. Now, I assume everybody in this room has a point in time when they suddenly started to question what was going on. At some point in 2020, you will have sort of got to a point where you went, there's something not quite right. It may have been in September 2020 when the rule of 6 came into promotion. Or the 10 o'clock curfew in the pub. Because the viruses went to sleep at 10:05. Now, one of the key issues for me is, what I did notice is the change in the public mood in 2020. The first time I was alerted to this was by my wife. It was about September, just before we were going to go into the tiers, remember then? She said, I need you to speak to the window cleaner. She said, why? He said, well, he follows you now on Twitter. And he says, if you give him 20 minutes about COVID, he'll give us a 20% discount, and he wants to talk about COVID on it. So, one of the things that happens is, when COVID is in the news, you can be rest assured Julia will invite me on to Talk TV. As she did do this Monday. Now, rest assured, believe it or not, if you look at the COVID data today, it's on the downturn again. You've not locked yourself down, you've not done anything different, but it's gone away. As they do, they rise and fall. But one of the things we talked about was Dame Jerry Harris's statement Chief of the UKHSA, former Deputy Chief Medical Officer. We will be more like Sweden next time, she says. There are people, most of the people have gone, haven't they? But those left are now rewriting their history and backpedaling, despite being supporters of over 200 different policies in 2020. They're now saying we'll be more like Sweden. But I want you to go back, think about the lockdown. Lockdown, in definition in prison, is not locked up, it is confined to yourself. You were confined to your house for 23 hours a day. You were allowed out for 1 hour of exercise, and in doing so, you were also allowed out to go to the grocery store. We were in fact prisoners. And do you know what? We all complied, which is amazing, if you think about it. No, we didn't. Oh, no, you didn't. Now, hot off the press, on the train here, I just told the COVID inquiry on the 18th of October, I will be giving oral evidence, okay? So, 12:30, take the day off, put it on, I'll be on. But one of the two things I'll be happening for. Now, it's interesting, because there are two things that Sweden has. It doesn't have a right to roam, it has a freedom to roam is enshrined in law. So that's number one legislation I'll be calling for. Nobody should be able to override your freedom to roam in areas unless you are prisoned. That's number one. The second key thing Sweden does is it has independence for public agencies. They are not civil servants and part of the government. They're independent to call out the government. That's the two features we need to have. Only effective legislation will prevent the establishment from enacting future mandates. Okay. Now, again, January 21, I'm moving forward a bit, because January 21 is, again, we ended up in our third lockdown. You know, you think at some point people would have asked questions and say, this doesn't seem to be working. And actually, Julie did invite me onto the show then, and I actually was in contact with people like Jay Bhattacharya at the time, because the modellers had their way, the advisors had their way, and there was a complete silence of science. And one of the key issues here is I want you to think is, what would the UK look like if there weren't skeptics? If there weren't people willing to question the status quo, people like yourselves willing to stand up for what you believe in. Well, actually, just like Sweden is a control for no lockdowns, in fact, we have countries in the world that we know are like that. Countries like China. It would have took at least 3 years to get to the truth. We'll get there in the end, but actually it would have taken much longer, and the outcomes would have been much harsher. Now, throughout this year period, there's been a lot of interesting things happened. I've lost friends, I've lost colleagues, but I have to say I've made immeasurably stronger colleagues and friends than I've ever had before. It is immeasurably important in life. It's about quality, not quantity. I want to spend the time with my friends and the people I want to love and cherish. I do not want to spend periods like we did in the past, separated. Now, what's happened to people is I've been taken down off Facebook, taken down off Twitter. I've been under investigation, complaint investigation at the university for over 18 months. I've had ministers such as Neil and Brian with Julia put up websites to try and besmirch us. We've also had the government surveillances, and Big Brother brought that to the fore and said the government has got you under surveillance, had Julia under surveillance, and even its own MPs. There's something fundamentally wrong in our ability to speak out at this moment in time. So there's some things I've really learned throughout this. Pay no attention to the modellers. Watch out for those people who speak certainty. Because we live in uncertain times, and much of what we're about is uncertainty and trying to reduce uncertainties and inform the debate. That's what evidence is there for, to inform your decisions, not to tell you what to do. But basically, the most fundamental principle is to stick to your fundamental principles, keep speaking out, and do that together. Thank you very much.
And last but by no means least, the fantastic Telegraph columnist Cheryl Jacobs.
I don't know how I follow that, but yeah, I'm going to try. I think my task as the last speaker is supposed to be to outline a plan for what Britain should do to stave off authoritarian dystopia in 5 minutes, which is rather ambitious, but I'll give it a go. So you're going to get a bit of wonkery from me and then a bit of philosophy at the end. So to be optimistic, I don't think all is hopeless, actually. And I think there are concrete things to be done that can actually shift the dial. On net zero, Sunak has proved willing to compromise. True, the PM is still refusing to have a frank conversation about the costings of net zero, because frankly, as long as green technology costs continue to broadly carry on failing, the blob will continue to believe that net zero should cost no more than 1% of GDP, which is apparently less than Brexit, and they love to repeat that often. But at least Sunak is showing crucial flexibility on timings. And I do think that a campaign that continues to hold the government's feet to the fire on timescale could actually really bear fruit now, because there is tangible evidence that the infrastructural and innovational developments that will be necessary for net zero are not happening quickly enough. The government will struggle to install enough electric car charging points by 2050. Heaven knows how it will execute vastly more complex tasks, such as building the necessary carbon capture storage architecture to back up its wind power sector. Lobbying the government to shift the timescale of net zero, perhaps back to 2060, and if necessary to 2070, an evidence-based argument informed by the history of innovation could prove very effective. So there is a lag of between 15 and 60 years between a major invention and its successful commercialization and national rollout. It wasn't until 6 decades after the invention of the incandescent light bulb that Western countries were being electrified on a national scale. I think that any successful campaign also needs to counter the urban myth that net zero isn't up for debate because the public overwhelmingly supports it. Because the polls actually show a paradox. Yes, the public is generally in favor of net zero, but here's the thing, they don't actually want to pay for it. For example, when you take into consideration personal cost, support for LTNs drops by half, from 45% to 22%. Support for phasing out gas boilers from 43% to 31%. It's a similar drop with electrical vehicle subsidies, and so on. And this paradox is becoming actually an urgent political dilemma in Westminster, as we saw with the Uxbridge by-election. There are campaign opportunities in other areas where freedoms are being threatened. A Sweden-inspired preparedness plan in the event of another pandemic is something that we really need to try and embed in the Downing Street operational handbook. The online harms bill is a bitter setback, I think, in the fight against the surveillance industrial complex. But there is a growing global movement that is arguing that control of our data should be a human right, like access to water. Freedom fighters in the UK could make a real difference with a grassroots movement that collaborated with the startups in the countries that are already doing really great work in this area, thinking about Estonia, exploring the potentially revolutionary idea of personal data stores, whereby people have complete control over when and how they share their data, which are stored in these secure pods. Still, I don't want to get carried away with optimism. I think we have reached a tipping point. After a golden age of consistent and steadily increasing freedom, for the first time in about 200 years, freedom has started to consistently shrink in Britain. Over the last 20 years, Britain's ranking in the Global Freedom Index has collapsed from 3rd place to 20th place. That's an absolute scandal. And there is an attitude of utter inevitability about this shift, that surveillance state capitalism is the inevitable outcome of our willingness to trade our digital privacy for convenience and bespoke marketing, that in an age of super catastrophic risk, surrendering to Big Brother is necessary to preserve the human race, that as Western countries enter secular stagnation, the drift of both working class and middle class voters alike to authoritarian state-engineered solutions is inevitable, and also this gravitation towards alternative values to liberty, such as equality or justice or fairness. It's remarkable how the left has completely given up on the language of freedom. It just blows my mind. But I don't think that a less free world is inevitable. I do think we are at a crossroads, because as the world becomes more volatile and fragmented, we do have a choice. We have a choice between a Western civilization system built on the principle of security or order, or a civilization built on the principle of liberty. And I do think we need to acknowledge, as people in the minority, that the road of security in a frightening world, in an uncertain world, in an unpredictable world, is tempting to many. So I think there are two big challenges. One is making the logical argument that for greater security, you actually need a minimum amount of freedom in the system. And the other is making a basic emotional argument for freedom. And I think that one of the reasons that Liz Truss's efforts failed was that this was actually missing. What has happened in the West, I think, is a collapse of faith in the underlying civilizational belief system. And we haven't actually seen such a collapse since the implosion of, the authority of the Catholic Church in the early modern age. I think this is truly seismic. Freedom, like God, like money, exists sola fides, by faith alone. As soon as we stop believing in it, it will disappear. Look at the people next to you, because they are your rare fellow faithfuls in what is in some ways a dying religion. It's a scary thought, but I think that it is vital we comprehend the true scale of the existential challenge ahead.
Fantastic stuff. I think we can all agree, just incredibly inspirational speakers. It's such a serious subject. We seem to be laughing a lot, which is nice. We've got loads of questions. We're going to have a bit of a discussion here. I've got some questions. We're going to get some questions from the floor as well. We've got lots to get through, so we're going to get straight to it. And if my panelists very, very kindly keep your answers short, we can get to as many questions as possible. Jay, if you are still with us, I hope he still is. Quick question to you on censorship, Jay. Can we really do anything about it? I suppose that's the question. And how do we insist that doctors, that journalists, and the public with different views aren't silenced in the future? What do you suggest?
Well, in the United States, the legal process apparently, to my utter amazement, actually works. The Missouri versus Biden case is going to basically force the government to stop censoring and at penalty of law. It's a remarkable thing that the American First Amendment is actually held. In the UK, I wonder. I mean, I did an interview with Lord Sumption at one point where he was very. He was very uncertain whether the UK judiciary would uphold the same principles. I think it has to be broader than just the judiciary. I think it can hold, but it will take an enormous effort, a popular effort, to force governments to get rid of this power that they wielded during the pandemic.
Thank you very much indeed. Laura, quick question to you. In terms of nudge influencing, I think we're all surprised by how it could be used in so many different ways. How is it currently influencing us, which we may not really even understand, in terms of reporting on climate change, on environment, on the weather and things like that? How much are we being nudged without most of us probably knowing about it? Yeah, I think you did introduce, yeah.
Is that on? Okay. Much more than you could possibly imagine. So there's a nudge unit that you all have heard of. It's now separate to the government, but still on broad framework contracts with the government. There are nudgers, behavioural scientists in every single government department and also in the regulatory bodies, in the NHS and the UK HSA. They're everywhere. It's a huge business. So nudge is completely embedded into government, and they form these kind of informal alliances and conversations, which is why you've got Sky coordinating with the nudge unit. And you mentioned climate. Everyone will have seen it in the weather reports this summer. It's something as obvious as that. You know, in a way, there's nothing new under the sun, except the sun. It was, you know, the lurid weather reporting was the most obvious example that you were supposed to be frightened. And of course, this creates a kind of perpetual doom loop, because if you're frightened, if your emotions are affected, then you want to lean into authority, giving them what they want.
It was extraordinary, wasn't it, how we were all apparently really fearful of getting to that lovely hot weather we had. And everyone I saw was going, yay, to the beach. It was quite bizarre. So it didn't work that time. Do you think people are waking up to it?
Okay. I think that our attitude to nudge is very polarised. In this room, these are the kinds of people who are quite alive to nudge and don't think it's a healthy marker of a democracy. But the reason that nudging is so embedded in government and that people have such a high tolerance for propaganda and surveillance and behavioural science is because some people think that if you don't agree with what should happen, then you should be subliminally influenced and covertly influenced. I think it's quite tacitly accepted in society. Look at the enormous appetite there was for incentives for the vaccine, not just the passports.
Yeah, that's a good point, good point. Carl, come to you. Okay, when it comes to talk of preparing for the next pandemic, and you mentioned Jenny Harries saying that we'd be more like Sweden. Well, I don't know, do crazy things like follow pre-pandemic planning. It'll never catch on. But when it comes to all of that, you know, how do we, I mean, you touched on it, but how do we make sure never again? Because as a lot of people are pointing out this evening, you know, a lot of people who are not in this hall think, oh, it's all in the past, what are you all still going on about it for? And they don't understand that this stuff has been embedded in terms of our expectations about what we do next time there's a bad flu.
Yeah, it worries me. It worries me because I think the key issue here is there is a huge commercial forces at play. And I think, you know, we spent 400 billion and a lot of people profited immeasurably from that. The vaccine manufacturers like Pfizer, over 100 billion US dollars in 2021. We've got companies like Novo Nordisk in Denmark who have a greater GDP, who are worth more than the whole of the GDP of their country. So there's a sense, I think, in the evidence-based world that things are getting worse. And I am deeply concerned about where we find ourselves, because what we see is a lowering of the bar of the quality of evidence. I talked about some of the legislation issues. Francis Hawes here may talk about the Public Health Act in terms of how we may change that. But at this moment in time, we are really in a commercial world that has a lot of influence and is driving a lot of the change. And I think we do need to see beyond that to a different world where we can rail back from those commercial forces.
Thank you for that. If you could pass the mic. It's amazing how we were all critical of pharmaceutical companies until 2020, and suddenly, yes, they're just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Sherelle, Matt Goodwin, who has sadly had to go, but and you've both talked about the new landscape where the old signposts have gone. And I think many people are now politically homeless. What do you think we can do about that? And how much can this organisation, this movement, how much can it do about that themselves?
I think that it's going to be imperative to debunk, somehow implode the myth of third wave fatalism. I think this is sort of this Blair right myth that there's one road, and there's no escape from this sensibilist, technocratic solution oriented politics, which is really just an illusion because it is just political parties trying to hold their broad tents together and also cobble together all these different voting blocks and come up with this hodgepodge mud of a politics, and they then pretend that it's, it's divinely fated, and that was the brilliance of Blairism, really. I think we're kind of still stuck in that. It's becoming more depressing. It's becoming more, Starmer, we've got no choice but to sort of embrace this hodgepodge green socialism, which isn't really thought through at all, even though the country's broke. It's that kind of thing. So I think that we've got to start establishing just the basic point in politics that there are choices. There are choices. And we might disagree, but let's have the debate about whether we go this way or that way. And what's really toxic in politics, I think, is this idea, this mythology, this religion of the third way.
Right, now I know we've got some people just fantastic people who've been so much involved with the Together movement who've got a load of questions. We're going to take them in two different bunches. We've got 9 people speaking. Again, if we could try and keep it a little bit tight. I know everyone's got so much they want to say. But can we start, please, coming up to, I believe, to the microphone. Francis Hoare, first up.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks to all the panel. The way the Online Safety Bill Act now will operate is firstly to give a duty of care to the social media companies to investigate potentially harmful speech, and for Ofcom, the regulator, to determine whether or not, if there is a complaint, they have complied with that duty of care. What effect do the panel think that means of regulation will have on their freedom of speech rights and that of all of the rest of us?
Thank you very much for that. Now, for the panel, if you want to note down any of the questions you want to answer, we're going to take a bunch of the questions, and then we can you can come back in on what you want to answer. Let's go now to Ben Pyle. Hello.
Hello. Thank you. I was fascinated and somewhat chilled by Jay's description of censorship and its relation to smearing, and that's something we've experienced as Together, being accused of far right. And so I would make the point very quickly. Become a member of Together, and then when people like the BBC call us far right, tell them that they're wrong, because that's what's made the difference. That's why they've had to withdraw those remarks and admit that they were wrong or that they made it up. Right? So, back to the panel. Of course, we've seen this kind of smearing and censorship before in climate change, in the climate domain. It's been going on for a long time. If you speak out in the wrong way, you're persona non grata on campuses everywhere. So I'd like to know, how does the panel see the weaponization of the environment and the climate in particular going along the same lines in the future, if they do at all, as the pandemic, as COVID, finally, and will they support our No to Net Zero campaign?
Support what?
Our No to Net Zero campaign, yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Ben. Rob Tyson. Rob Tyson, are you there? Oh.
Hello, everyone. So, I think it's fair to say Together has made a dent on issues like LTNs, ULEZ. Now, one of the things with those issues is that it's very obvious if you wake up one morning and find your road is blocked. It's very obvious if you go to the cemetery one day and you see Sadiq Khan has put a camera up. Now, one of the things that concerns me about some of the issues around censorship, information control, by definition, these are a lot more subtle and hidden. So what's the solution to trying to get those things more on the agenda and explain them better to people so they understand the situation, and hopefully we can do something there and make a bit of a difference like perhaps we have with LTNs and ULEZ. And if you're not a member, please join so we can do more stuff like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, certainly a lot of that did go onto the agenda thanks to what happened to Nigel Farage. He does a good service there, Coots. Never thought I'd say that. Thanks, Coots. Let's get to Simon. I hope I'm not pronouncing this correctly. McKeown?
Yes, fine.
Close enough. Thank you very
Close
much.
enough, yeah. Hi, so I'm the chair of the public sector on the Together Cabinet. So Laura's description of the nudgeocracy and Carl's presentation of the need for a rational approach to medicine are key to challenging the new ruling class that Matt talked about. Alan told us this afternoon and again at tonight's meeting that Together have been hugely impactful on the local, regional and national stages. But what does the panel think about how much influence we can have as the public when we focus our campaigning work? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that and for all your fantastic work as well. Danny Zlupko. Thank you, Danny.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. All the panellists have talked about the issues that we're facing when it comes to democracy, freedom, restrictions, censorship and control. Since it started, we at Together have held many events up and down the country that have been incredibly successful because passionate people are getting active, getting involved, coming together, being involved with this brilliant organisation Together in our efforts to protect our freedoms. On that, as Rob said, I'd encourage everybody to join if you've not done already. If you're already a member, join in more, do whatever you can. Please help us as much as you can because together we are so powerful as a group of people. On to the question. Subject of public coming together, as I've just mentioned, I'd like to ask, Laura's probably the best one to answer this, about nudge. How can the public spot it? How can we push back against it? And how can we offset the impact of it?
Great, thank you. Pam, who is, have you got your surname? From Edinburgh. Is Pam here? Hello, Pam. Shout if you are. No? Okay, let's go to Chris from Bristol, I think.
Hello. We've heard from Matt about spelling out the issues with the new lot of elite rulers, and Jay has talked about the need to put yourself on the line in spite of smears and censoring, which is what we did in Bristol when we organised our meeting.
Can I ask, could you go a little bit closer to the mic just to make sure we can all hear you? Thank you.
What advice would you give to the people who are frightened of speaking up in an effort to help them be heard?
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Cheyenne Roloffs. Oh, are you here? Hello. We need to get you to, I think is there a microphone on that side as well? No? There you go. No, leave it there.
Hi, I'm just going to butt in very quickly.
She's there now. Cheyenne Roloffs, there you go.
Hi. I'm here representing the Cambridgeshire Residents Group, and we're actually celebrating a huge win in Cambridgeshire that we've been battling the congestion charge for the past year. And so my question is, obviously we've accomplished this with the support of #Together, but as this win demonstrates, I guess I would like to know what your views or thoughts are on local initiatives like ours when we're campaigning and we're fighting for or fighting against these limitations that we're actually fighting for our freedoms.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. And Caroline Horsford.
Hi, Caroline from Bath. Free Bath Streets, in fact. We had a meeting in February, thanks to Together. There were 300 people who came together from all parts of Bath. What we're finding in Bath is that our Lib Dem Council is working against us. Any consultation that we have, even if it goes in our favour, is ignored. We are not being heard. It is now day 220 of them saying that they will have a local debate, and we are not being heard. We are winning, though, but it's behind the scenes. How can we get local government to listen to us?
Thank you. Look, there's lots of different questions and lots of different things. Can I just come to the panel, or whoever wants to come in first, on quite a lot of issues about local people getting together, working together, taking action. What advice do you give them? What are the challenges? What do you think? Michelle, shall I come to you first in terms of what people can do, what you suggest in terms of people making changes and having their voices heard?
Find the weak spot in the policies, and be honest about where the government kind of have not got it sewn up, but have a kind of a coherent argument. It may be disputable, but they think that they can argue it. And I think the costings of net zero is one thing. They basically believe that net zero is affordable based on this premise that the technology costs are going to fall. I actually think it's going to be very hard to kind of combat them on that. But you could argue with them on timescale. So it's kind of choose your battles based on the weakness in the evidence, and also have evidence, basically.
That is the key thing, hasn't it? And on certainly on ULEZ, that's played such a crucial role, hasn't it? Just have and LTNs as well, and indeed a few things that Jay and Carl have done along the way as well. What do you make of it, Laura?
So we had a question about local campaigning, and then there's a success in the room about local campaigning. So there's an opportunity for Together here, if it's not already happening, for those successes to become case studies and shared. What did you do? How did it work? Share the knowledge. My taxi driver on the way here hadn't heard of Together. Every taxi journey is an opportunity to evangelise something or other, right? And I mean, he was just thrilled that there are people campaigning against ULEZ that cared that lockdown ruined his business, but he hadn't heard of Together. And that's because it's really hard to get a platform with the mainstream media. So I think that all of us need to do a bit more samizdat style sharing. That's sending emails to people, sharing articles. You can't do it all the time with your friends, or you'll have no friends yet, but we need to do more kind of underground sharing of things.
Yeah, but we make new friends.
And talking about making new friends, I mean, there were quite a few questions I thought I'd like to come back on, but one was somebody said, do you have any advice about speaking up? And I think this is a really, really, really difficult thing. There's a whole chapter in my new book, which is called Free Your Mind. And the chapter's called Be the First to Speak Up. And that's because actually it's very difficult to speak up, because we're herd animals. We are wired, for some very sound evolutionary reasons, to conform. And so to be the one person that speaks up is difficult. But even that arch nudger I mentioned earlier in my talk, Cass Sunstein, he wrote a book about conformity, and he said it takes one voice of sanity to reverse a cascade of conformity. So never forget that one person, that child that calls out the naked emperor is the person that changes everything for the whole town. And conformity is increasingly prized, and of course it is, because it makes us so much more easier, so much more easy to govern, doesn't it? But it's not very long ago we did prize rebels and misfits. Do you remember the Steve Jobs Apple ad? Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits. And so we need to get a little bit of that back. You need to be courageous about reclaiming your voice, and there are lots of benefits to speaking up. You do find yourself in a new in-group of out-groupers, and we're the reliable, trustworthy ones.
That's so true. And can I say, before I bring in Carl and Jay on that, actually, is that I'm sure the ladies in the room who are members of this group will not mind, but some of the more prominent women involved in speaking out on COVID, on lockdown, we formed a little WhatsApp group early on called the Rebels. And we have found that an amazing source of support, exchange of information, but also just when we want to use bad words, I can't say on air, we use that as well. But just find yourself a support group. So, get even just local people in your area, and then it kind of expands. It really, really does expand. But to have that backup, so you don't feel that you're alone. You don't feel you're speaking out alone, because, as you say, it's amazing when one person says something, other people are thinking it, and sometimes you have to be the leader. Carl, and we'll come to you in a moment, Jay, as well. In terms of speaking out in medicine, in science, you're one of the brave people. An awful lot of people were getting in touch with me throughout all this period. And it's happening with climate change as well. It's happened with lockdown and vaccines and COVID generally. They basically are told, if you speak out, you're going to lose your job. How do we encourage more people who want to speak out?
Yeah, there's a lot of points out there. I often find we're in a very knowledge intensive, more information than ever, and it's harder to get to the truth, isn't it? So one of the things I also say to the people out there, I often go back to some of the old things I learnt when I was at primary school. And I often tell people about the story of the tortoise and the hare. And you turn up one day and this mad professor starts talking about tortoises and a hare, and I see loads of people jumping around doing something, and 6 months later I say, how's it going? And they say, I'm onto something different. So one of the key things is be a tortoise. Make it realistic, just slowly keep going, and at some point on that journey something will happen. So it's like this Together declaration, 2-3 years in, if you're here in 7-10 years' time, important issues will happen. The second thing that I see a lot of is retrofitting of evidence to policy. Now, the definition of evidence-based medicine is to use the best available evidence, not any old evidence, okay? But with some very simple basic skills, people could pick apart the evidence. And I do think that could be something we could think about, just some little videos, little tips, how to look at evidence and change what you're doing, and then be critical. And in doing so, everybody in the room has to learn the skills to communicate better. Because there's a force of people out there on social media who make it their living to criticize you and have a go at you. And therefore, we need to get better and better at writing, talking, thinking about these issues, and it's a skill, so you've got to practice it. So I would tell you, just like our first speaker think about writing a blog, think about going on Substack, just have a go, but make it feasible and do it as a tortoise, not a hare.
Excellent stuff, thank you. Jay, I know it's difficult following from afar. I'm going to let you come back in on whichever question you want to come back in on. What do you want to say?
So I wanted to address the question about social media, the question of this online censorship bill in the UK with the duty of care. And I want to just emphasize how dangerous a bill it is. Essentially, what this bill does is it puts in the hands of eminently unqualified people in social media companies, their trust and safety divisions, who don't have the expertise to actually do the job of doing this duty of care. And what they're going to do is they're going to label people as misinformers, when in fact they maybe just have reasonable opinions that disagree with what the central narrative says. And I think the fact that the UK has passed this bill with an idea with the label safety tells you everything. Like, what is unsafe about having contrary ideas being allowed to be said? Some of them are going to be wrong, some of them are going to be right. I think it's vital that a political movement embrace a counter to this bill, to get this bill just sort of pulled back, because I think without that, essentially what it does is it makes it very, very difficult to organize communities of people who know true things and then want to say true things. But I mean, an example of this, for instance, is people who've been vaccine injured. Very early on, they wanted to form groups to support each other on Facebook, and they were smeared as anti-vaxxers telling lies about their own experience. It's very, and it's exactly what will happen to anyone who pushes back regular people. It makes it much more difficult. It requires people to have courage, when really what should just be is our birthright to be able to say what we think. And if we're wrong, we're wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be
very, very good point. Sherelle, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Okay, yeah. Oh, there we are. No, magic. I wanted to come in on the surveillance capitalism phenomenon, because it's something that's really disturbing to me. There's a Harvard professor called Shoshana Zuboff, and she wrote a bestseller called Surveillance Capitalism. I recommend it all to you, where she details how the scraping of data from private human experience on free digital platforms, and then the computation of this into behavioral data, which is then translated into these prediction products sold on a kind of human futures market, is something that we should really be discussing, and whether we're comfortable with this. And the government should actually be leading this conversation, casting a light on this phenomenon, and leading the conversation about whether our data should actually be, as I said, a human right, whether it should be a property right akin to, and that it should have value that we should be compensated for. And instead, the state seems to be more interested in setting the ground rules and how people should be interacting with each other on these platforms, which are used for the profiteering of data. And actually, what is worse is they actually want a cut in terms of scrutinizing, in terms of having the surveillance powers on these platforms, which is a real scandal. And so this new super blob, it's kind of the convergence of private and public, and it's really disturbing. It's going to be very hard to stop.
Absolutely. And again, and especially when, again, everything can be monetized as well, and then money taken away from us. Carl, you want to come back in very briefly?
Yeah, a number of points. Just coming back to the censorship and issue. This issue of misinformation and disinformation is incredibly important, who gets to decide. And in doing so, Jay's been called and I've been called an agent of disinformation by certain papers. Now, in expressing uncertainty about certain policies, you will be considered an agent of misinformation or disinformation. This has to be called out because as a doctor, I have a duty of candor and honesty to express uncertainty when it exists. The problem is that certainty, if it's directly opposing to a policy, so for instance, if I say, you made up a rule of 6, there's no evidence for it, doesn't make sense, why are we doing it? That's misinformation. And that's the problem with the WHO approach. What you're basically saying, the fundamental problem is, the status quo and the truth is the government policy or the body's policy. That we have to tackle. And that's the problem in the online safety bill, who gets to decide?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just getting little hints of Jacinda in New Zealand here. Quick word from you as well.
Yeah, there's a question of Ben's that I don't think any of us addressed at all, which was, will climate go the same way as COVID in terms of the behavioural science and the control? And the answer to that is yes, it already really has. So when I interviewed Spy B advisors for my book, A State of Fear, I asked all of them what the plan was to get people's fear back down to normal. And one of them said, well, why would we do that? Because we have to go from COVID to climate. And there are so many different behavioural science reports about how to nudge people into adopting net zero behaviour, because we will have to don a lot of hair shirts if we're going to meet targets. And it's a very big ask. That involves using fear, like with COVID. And I think one of the most egregious things is, if you remember the phrase, don't kill granny, there's a sort of a similar thing happening with climate, where children get taught about climate in almost every aspect of their education, and using their anxiety and grief and fear is considered totally acceptable. And now there are even grief networks and support groups for people with climate anxiety because it's gone that far.
Yeah, and then they tell us all our children are really unhappy when they're telling them that the world's about to end, exactly. Right, let's get some more questions. I know, James Melville, you're going to come back to the issues of digital ID, which is something you're very much on social media.
Yeah, I think one of the main concerns over the last 3 years is a mission creep of digital ID. This started really with vaccine passports, which I think was one of the most illiberal, draconian aspects of this entire crisis. We've now got to a point where we're heading down the tracks of central bank digital currencies as well. There's a lot of regulation and legislation on online security. There's obviously the surveillance aspect to this with ULEZ as well. So on a number of different fronts, we're facing forms of suppression, being cancelled, or being told what to do or how to behave because of digital. So my question to the panel is, where do we go from here? Where do you think, honestly, we're going to be with digitalization of everything in 5 years' time? And how do we stop it?
Great. Thank you very much. Adam Brooks. There's a little ULEZ corner over there.
I'm a bit nervous.
You like the naughty boys in the coach in the back on the way on a school trip.
Right, firstly, I'm honoured to be a founding member of Together. What Alan and the team has done is incredible, and I'm so proud of him and to call him a friend. So if you could give him a round of applause. Now, with the recent wins on LTNs and the pushback that we together have created against ULEZ, it shows what people power can achieve. But people power is no good unless it's organised, and that is what Together is about. So I need you to urge your friends, your family, your colleagues to sign up, to support us, or even become members, because as an organised group, we are very, very powerful. Now, my question to the panel. With Rishi Sunak now turning on many net zero policies, or nut zero, as Dan Wootton would say, and with him also riding back on car-related policies like LTNs, what are the panel's fears as it looks likely that we will have a Labour government come next year?
Oh, I didn't like that. Anthony Hinton. We're going who? I do apologise. We're going to David Axe, please.
Thank you. So the panel has very eloquently testified to the way in which, if I could paraphrase, the way in which the people are being excluded from our democracy. So Matt very ably stated how we were being bullied and forced to acquiesce to an alien kind of woke ideology, enforced by the institutions that we work for, via the schools, via the universities. Jay Bhattacharya, I think, has given excellent testimony to the way in which speech has been curtailed and suppressed. So my question, from this is, what is the issue or constellations of issues in forthcoming general elections and forthcoming elections, maybe in the States as well, that we can use to illustrate the need to put the people back at the heart of our democracy, to put the demos back in democracy?
Great, thank you. Amanda Hunter.
Hello, I'm the Chair of Social Care at the Together Cabinet.
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic? Thank you.
Okay. And I'm also co-founder of Unlock Care Homes, which was set up during the pandemic to against visiting restrictions. And that brings me to my point and my question. We saw that during lockdowns, care homes had no ring of protection. In fact, the draconian visiting restrictions and insane hospital discharge policy actually exposed them to far greater harm. Worse, those policies have brought an already broken system to its knees, rendering it incapable of meeting the needs of our elderly and disabled communities. Social care has an enormous impact on people's lives, the NHS, but society at large. That's why Together plans to make it a key campaign issue moving forwards. However, we need wider public involvement to help us defend the public interest. What does the panel think about this, and how do we bring change together? Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Moss.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ben Moss. I sit on the steering committee. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's actually an observation. It's not for you, but it's for generally. We've got 2,000 fantastic people in this room.
Talk to the mic.
We've got 2,000 fantastic people here, and for me, on my business, I'm a major donor to Together, and I've been involved for 2 years. And I've seen what a difference it's made, and I can see the strength. I've seen what it's doing this year. So really, for me, it's the 2,000 people here. I'd like them to take away this amazing message, what we've seen today, and to spread the gospel, and to spread that word to all our friends and get more people involved. And also from business, I would like to see more businesses coming on board with me and donating.
Great stuff, thank you. And finally, Stuart Jackson, I know you've got some questions to read out. They've been sent out to people who sadly can't be here, but we wanted to make sure everyone got a chance to have their say. So tell us what they are.
Yeah, thank you. Stuart couldn't be here tonight, so I'm Stephen Jackson instead.
Oh, sorry, apologies, sorry.
That's all right. It's a joke.
Old lady eyes.
I tweet as Laura Fiction on Twitter. Sorry, renamed as X, or is it Y? I don't know. Anyway, questions from the public. First off, Dame Caroline Dinage MP. Oh, no, sorry, wrong one. This is from Ricky Davison, who asks, how likely do you think it is that this or a future UK government will attempt to impose COVID-style restrictions for a perceived pandemic in the coming years? And what should we be doing now, specifically, to make this less likely? So that's Ricky Davison. Second one, this is from a Julie Edwards. Why was the press so incapable of questioning the COVID measures taken? They were always asking, why weren't measures taken earlier, or even more restrictive, never whether they would be really effective or violate our time-honoured civil liberties. Was it due to herd thinking, fear of being branded a conspiracy theorist, government or editorial pressure? What, in your view, accounts for it? And finally, from Mark Tucker, how do you think we can best hold the purveyors of poor science and decision makers accountable?
Thank you very much, Stuart. Jay, I know you're still there. I just want to ask about the specific stuff in the UK in terms of the election. That sort of came up in terms of the politics of what's going on in a number of those questions. Can I come to you actually first, Laura? Again, I think a lot of people here feel that they're politically homeless, as we touched on a little bit earlier. In terms of people having a voice, people going to speak out, making sure we get democratic representation, whether it's about a future lockdown and votes in Parliament aren't just waved through, and cabinet. I have a cabinet minister telling me that they were kept when they did have a cabinet meeting when they were on Zoom. They actually had the cabinet ministers on. They were on mute. They couldn't even speak at the own cabinet meeting. I mean, there was no democracy in that time. How do we make sure that doesn't happen for a future pandemic, but also doesn't happen on other issues like climate change, environment, net zero?
Oh God, I wish I had a really easy and good answer to that.
You should write a book about it.
Yeah, no, I don't though, because the problem is that fear takes over people's brains, and they don't think rationally anymore. The one question I'd really like to come back to instead, if that's right, was James's question about digital ID. Digital ID is always skirting on the edges, isn't it? Tony Blair mentions it about every year. And I don't think digital ID in itself is necessarily a bad thing. It depends who's holding the data and what it's for and how in control of it you are. When it gets really worrying, I think, is when it's linked to money. If a central bank digital currency is involved and is programmable, and you might think, oh, well, we wouldn't do that because that's the preserve of authoritarian countries. But actually, the Bank of England and the Treasury are consulting on it, and one of the questions is, should it be programmable, which means it would be totally linked to your identity. So that's a really big thing to watch on the horizon, and the country that led the way with lockdowns has been leading the way on digital currency. They introduced a digital yen. One thing they did with that is give it an expiration date so that your savings would just, if you didn't spend them in time.
But it is extraordinary how few people in this country know anything about, in terms of the social credit system in China. When I talk about it, people think I'm talking about a Hollywood movie. Well, it's actually happening.
The digital yen is even a different thing to the social credit system, which is even worse, which means that if you behave in a way that your local authority doesn't like, you can be punished and sanctioned, such as taking your rights to travel or education away. One student was denied access to university because her dad was in debt. So it does lead to really terrible things.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Jay, if I could ask you, in terms of how likely do you think that a future UK government, well, for your case, a future US government, would impose COVID-style restrictions again in the event, and it's not an if, it's a when, there is another pandemic?
I think it's quite likely, unless the lockdowns are explicitly rejected by these COVID inquiries, and in the United States we don't even have one, it will come back. It's now the template for the response for respiratory virus pandemics.
Okay, thank you. Sherelle, can I come to you on that as well? Because one of the things that when people say, oh, move on, is that actually unless we do get our politicians, our public health bodies and everybody and the media and the rest of the media to accept that mistakes were made, that it was the wrong thing to do, as opposed to acting with utter shock and surprise. Oh, look, there are all these kids who aren't at school and can't read and write and have got mental health problems, and we've got mass excess deaths and things. I mean, they keep being so, and we've got massive debt because we spent loads of money paying people to sit at home for years. I mean, they're completely surprised by all of this, by the way. Some of us were all pointing it out at the time, but how do we make sure it doesn't happen again unless they accept that what they did was wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's the killer question, right? Because it's extraordinary. We've got evidence now that lockdowns in this country saved fewer than 1,700 deaths. There's been studies, comprehensive studies, showing that lockdowns had an impact in Western societies of reducing mortality rates by 0.2%. And if you then weigh that up with the costs of lockdown, the monumental costs, not least the inflation due to the overheating of the economy, that's staggering. And yet, with the COVID inquiry, the takeaway seems to be that we didn't lock down hard enough.
Soon enough.
Soon enough. So until we can really puncture that idea, I think it's going to be really, really tough. I will say, though, there is this question, we were discussing it earlier, about affordability and whether an argument that we simply couldn't afford another lockdown may change people's attitudes next time round, or just the retrospective perspective of knowing what the potential costs are. And we'll have
and there are a lot more people, and I'm coming to you, Carl, actually. There are a lot more people who don't speak out, but do actually, were actually concerned and were quietly breaking the rules, just getting on with their lives very quietly, and then they'll say, well, I don't know why everyone's so bothered because I was quietly breaking the rules. Now, the thing about sort of when it's imposed, when it's like a central digital currency, or when it's your local, low traffic neighbourhood, or it's very difficult for people to quietly break the rules, because they'll be fined and they'll be criminalised and they won't be able to spend their money. So what do you make of all of that? Oh.
Yeah, so look, there's a lot going on here, great questions. Can I just, I'm going to come back, but James Melville, I think digital ID, vaccine passport, health information is increasingly going to be monetised. So it's inevitable. So I think groups like HEART have done really well. So I think you need an information group, similar type of that informs people what is happening to the data and keeps going. So that's number one. Number two, the lady who spoke about the care homes. Care homes have been, for me, the devastation of this. And so when I think about where the problems exist, they exist at the extremes of life. The young people and the very elderly. That's where the problems are, and the major ones. And I think that's where we focus. But what I've talked about is we need a new law which is about advocacy. Every vulnerable person should have a named advocate. So if Julia has a grandma or a mother, she can be their advocate, and you are able to go into all settings, hospitals, care homes, irrespective of any legislation, even the time zone. And your job is to go in there and do the things that were needed in the pandemic. And I am buoyed by the fact there is evidence coming out. We've got an article about studies that comes out, but the words that are coming out from interviews of care homes are devastating. And this is one about personal confinement practices. This is the quote. So they couldn't have their belongings until it had been left in a certain place and washed at a certain heat and 72 hours before you can have them back. You go in your room and you can't see anybody, and when you do, they've got masks and visors and you cannot hear them, and you've got all of that to contend with, and you've got confusion and you've got dementia, and you've got none of your advocacy there. So I think that's incredibly important. So I think that's an important point I would like to make, and I didn't cover your other points.
That's all right. Look, I know there'll be people who've got trains to catch and things. We are going to have to, wind this up. I'm just going to let you all just say, if you could do it really briefly. I'll start with you, Jay. Just one or two sentences. Just you'll sum up the message you want to send people from this hall and people who are watching at home, people who are going to watch it in the future on YouTube. What message do you want to send to them? Jay, start with you.
Censorship kills, but we as a people together can reject it, and we have to.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. Sherelle, your final words.
One sentence.
One sentence. Microphone up.
I'm going to throw down a challenge, which is something that I'm thinking about a lot, and I hope that to sort of impart that question to you. What is the basic emotional argument for freedom in the 21st century?
Love it. Thank you. Laura.
Well, I think that the last several years have taught me that a lot of things I took for granted were just an illusion, such as freedom. But there was one domain that the government couldn't get into, and that was my mind. So I would say everyone should be skeptical, always ask questions, take courage, think for yourself, and find the other good people like you to coordinate with.
Thank you. Carl.
Where's Alan? Has he left?
No, he's over there.
He's there, ready to come on.
He's loitering.
I wanted to say to Alan and all the people who started this, what a great job. It was September 2021 at a fringe event at the Conservative Party conference when all this started. And I just wanted to say, stuff is happening. People are getting worried at the top, and the establishment are starting to backpedal because of the influence and the pressure you're creating. So I just want to say, keep going.
Great stuff. Just before I hand back to Alan, a big thank you to all our fantastic panellists tonight. None of them needed an introduction, but we gave it to them anyway. But I just want to say personally for me, look, 2020 was just a year of despair. 2021 got better. 2023. Do you know what though? You know, being here tonight, seeing all of you, seeing what Alan's done, all these amazing people on the panel, the amazing people asking questions, gives me hope. And life is nothing without hope. We have so much hope. Do not despair anymore. We are together, and we are going to make a difference.
Great.
Well, absolutely fantastic. We could carry on. We're thinking about doing a day conference and a weekend conference soon, but really remarkable panel. And thank you to Jay. And it's great to be around our heroes. Thank you so much, Julia, and all the speakers. Now, I hadn't realised that a friend was going to be here, someone that has been very important in arguing for freedom, in being prepared to put himself on the line and bring people onto the show and discuss it. And regardless about anything, views about what may or may not have happened in the last 48 hours, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Dan Wootton. You want to stand up? Dan Wootton, stand up, please. It's going to take, and we're all going to stand by GB News, and we're going to stand by anyone. I'm going to stand by people that I vehemently disagree with as it happens, because like Voltaire, I think that I'd be prepared to die for you to speak in Britain with ideas that I don't like, and that's what we got to defend together. Now we're going to have another hero or heroine of mine coming on in a minute. It's going to be Rose Windross, who's brilliant and has sung internationally with Soul to Soul and many others. But you're going to have to put up with me for just a couple more seconds. We've got some great things going on here. We've got some of our business members outside. Do go and visit them. And we've got friends, the Free Speech Union and others that have got stalls. Great work like the Academy of Ideas and the Battle of Ideas. And Together's founding principle is about working with all different groups, campaigners, individuals, and getting the public involved, making sure the public, we the people can put pressure on the elected representatives, on media, and get grassroots movements going. And like we said in the video, if they're not able to be up for the job, we'll do it. We'll get our cabinet, we'll have our people, we'll get the good people in each of the areas that will stand independently, as Nigel was talking about earlier, because we need to see a future where we're at the heart of things. I'd like to see, and I think that together we all want to see, like with the Great Exhibition, a Festival of Britain, where we can imagine the next 100 years for engineering, growth, productivity, for wealth creation for everyone, for freedom, liberties, privacy, autonomy, and for us to make decisions and use our judgment and discretion and not be nudged and bullied and coerced and limited. And you know what, guys? We're going to win. And we're going to do it together. So I'll ask you one more time. Thank you to all. Thank you to the Cabinet. We've just gone live on the website. Also, please sign no-to-net-zero.uk. Lots of information on the website. We've just launched it. We want to really make that a big thing in the year ahead, along with our other campaigns we're going to continue on. But please join as a member. If you've come tonight and you think you want to have your voice heard, join as a member, get your friends to join as a member. Let's double our membership tonight. Let's everyone get one member to join. If you're a member, by the way, you can come to the after party tonight. You've got a bangle, so that's that. If you want to become a member and get a bangle, then do that. It's going to be good. Bribery is terrible. Get involved regionally and nationally. Make the hubs. Get ambassadors. We need them in every town and city. But I'm going to finish on something, another one of my heroes, actually. But many of you might have seen the documentary When We Were Kings about Muhammad Ali and the Rumble in the Jungle with really effervescent and interesting Norman Mailer. You may have many views about him, but it's a brilliant documentary. And in it, there's a very poignant moment. And it's when Muhammad Ali was told there was a very short poem in the English language. And he was asked really spontaneously as he was going into an Ivy League lecture hall, a bit like this, maybe even more people, ask this guy what he thinks of a short poem. Can he come up with one? And he paused and he said, me, we. And it became the shortest poem in history. And this is the way that we change things democratically. Me and we. Now the wind is in our sails, everyone. We've got people like Nick and Phil who've championed the challenge against you. Let's give them a round of applause, everyone. They've done brilliant work. We've got Howard Cox, who did Fair Fuel for 13 years. 13 years campaigning. Howard Cox. On a whole range of issues. And we've got many brilliant people in here and watching on video and out there, and we're going to go and meet some more people. The wind is in our sails. So let's go out there and make this next year even bigger and better with more impact in every city and every region nationally. And like with the vaccine mandates, illuminate to the world what can be done when we stand together, like we've been doing with cash, like we're pushing on free speech, like we've done with LTNs and ULEZ, and we're going to continue up and down the country, and like we're going to break the back of net zero and have a proper discussion about costs and benefits, about what's needed in Britain and what the public needs in housing and in infrastructure and resources, as well as keeping our freedoms, by the way.